I've taken some really cool road trips to visit theme parks and stuff, but there's one 2-week long trip that really stands out as possibly the craziest road trip I have ever taken. I have really been blessed to have opportunities to go on a couple incredible road trips, to go visit theme parks, a trip to go down to Houston's Astroworld before it closed, a couple trips to go up into Pennsylvania and Ohio and visit Cedar Point and Kings Island and Knoebels Grove and some of those parks. Of all the trips I've taken, there's really one that almost stands out as the craziest trip and most incredible trip I ever have had the opportunity to take. It was back in 2004. We were living in Southern California at the time. My wife was teaching full-time. I was substitute teaching, long-term subbing, and was about to work on getting a full-time teaching job. And California decided to change its licensing requirements and education requirements on teachers, essentially put me out of a job, and meant I would have had to go back for more college after already having a bachelor's degree plus some. And not just go back to college, but have to actually spend a year not working because of what they were going to make me do educationally, which didn't work with a family of 4 and needing the income. At the same time, we had had some friends that had moved down to Florida, had been looking at that anyways, and been feeling kind of a pull, and so, long story short, we made the decision to move down to Florida. California's school system at that time ended at the end of June. For Florida, we needed to be down there by the beginning of July to be able to make the move, get checked into the school and everything else, so it didn't give us a very big window of time to make this move. And with 2 kids and trying to close everything out, we ended up with this kind of weird plan where my wife stayed in California to the very end of June to finish up her school year, to kind of wrap up the house. My wife was waiting for the moving company to come pick up our big furniture and other stuff. My kids actually flew out to Missouri, where my mother lived, to stay with her for a few days. And my friend from college, Dave, and I packed up everything that we were going to take into a minivan, and we kept our computer and other things we wanted to keep close to us, and we started to drive all the way across the country. It's not a short trip from California to Florida, and we decided to make it a little more fun and interesting, meeting my kids in Missouri halfway so I get to visit my mom. But hey, let's take advantage of the opportunity and get to see and do stuff we would never get to do otherwise. So we planned this 2-week long trip with all sorts of different stops along the way, just to have some fun and experience something we would never get to do otherwise. Our very first stop was Las Vegas, which was a little more family friendly at the time. Both of us are big nerds, and so of course we had to see Star Trek The Experience, which was there. And that was absolutely amazing, meeting Klingons and Borg and getting teleported. Just a really cool experience. I also had a friend who actually worked at the Stratosphere Tower at the time. So we actually got free admission, free rides, free ride pictures, and got to go up and experience the Big Shot and everything that was up on top. And I have to tell you, X-Scream was actually one of the few rides that made me a little nervous, because you're actually hanging out over the edge of the building on this thing. Right down below you is an International House of Pancakes, where on its roof it says in huge letters, IHOP, and you're looking down at it from hanging over the edge of the building going, ooh, I could be a pancake if I fell. Yeah! Now, one of the weird things about this trip is the van we were driving at the time was an old Plymouth Voyager, whose air conditioning didn't work. Where we lived in Southern California, no big deal. It rarely got that hot, but we're driving across the desert at the end of June, the first part of July, fully expecting to cook until we can get to Missouri, where we can get the air conditioning fixed cheap. Except we were actually really blessed in that we followed this storm front all the way across. They kept temperatures cool and comfortable. It was amazing. It was almost like God had prepared this front all the way across. And we literally drove with this thing. We stopped at the Grand Canyon in Arizona after crossing the Hoover Dam. And honestly, pictures don't do this thing justice. If you ever get the chance to go see the Grand Canyon, go. It is absolutely amazing. From there, we made our way to Albuquerque, made a quick stop at Cliffs, and got to ride the New Mexico Rattler, which was an amazing ride. Our timing there was great because it actually had a small tornado hit town right near the park the night before we got there from that front that we were following. After New Mexico, we headed off to the panhandle of Texas, got to visit Wonderland, which has one of the weirdest looking roller coasters you're ever going to find, watched some kids try to kill themselves on the Rapids ride, and had a good time. It was an interesting park, one I wouldn't make as a destination, but it was really cool to be able to stop by on this trip. Headed up into Oklahoma, where we got to visit Bell's in Tulsa when it was still there and got to ride everything. And neat little park. Still think the fairground did them wrong. Would love to see them be able to rebuild the park. But it was a fun park. And also hit Frontier City in Oklahoma City for the first time, which was a really neat little park. At the time, it was part of Six Flags, and we had Six Flags passes that we kind of made sure we had for this trip. Because it wasn't officially branded Six Flags, but they did allow us to use our passes and get in, and that was a lot of fun. Again, another park I never would have gotten to visit otherwise. And then after that, we finished the drive up to Missouri, where we spent a few days with my mother, got the van air conditioning fixed, cheap, especially compared to California prices. It was a good deal. Got a bunch of rain, but managed to get our first visit ever to Silver Dollar City, which I wasn't that familiar with at the time. Got to see Branson, had a great time at Silver Dollar City, really enjoyed it. It was actually one of the highlights of the trip for us. But we were disappointed that we didn't get to go to Celebration City, which was open at the time, but it poured rain the day that we were in Branson. And we just kind of looked at it and went, you know what? My mother lives here. We'll be back again. We'll catch it another time. Alas, that didn't happen. Before we got back up, they closed the park and never got to visit it. But got to drive by. After spending a few days in Missouri, heading over to Marshfield to check out Laura Ingalls Wilder's home there, and having some fun visiting family, we loaded up again for the second half of our trip. Made a stop in St. Louis to check out Six Flags there and had a great time with that park. Drove past the Arch, didn't really stop for it. Made our way off into Tennessee and we headed all the way out to Dollywood. Before we got that far though, we made a stop in Memphis, went over to Graceland, didn't spend a huge amount of money they wanted to go tour Elvis Presley's home, but we did drive into the city. We actually wanted to visit a park that was there. I believe it was Liberty Land. But right as we get to the park, they'd had a big power outage and shut the park down. Bummer. Didn't get to do that. And unfortunately, that park is now gone as well. So close, but so far. From there, we then headed over to Nashville, had a great time poking around the Grand Ole Opry, bought fireworks, because right at that point, we're at the 4th of July, and in California, if it leaves the ground or explodes, it's illegal. So this was the first time we really got to experience mortars, parachutes, and some of the really cool stuff like that. So we bought a few and had some fun. Got to Pigeon Forge, spent 2 days at Dollywood, and oh my goodness, amazing park. Absolutely amazing. Absolutely loved Dollywood and the whole Pigeon Forge area. I was really grateful when we got the chance to go back and visit that again a couple years ago, because Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge and the Smokies are just gorgeous. Loved how similar it was to Silver Dollar City, but not the same. And then after that, we started finally to head down south. We still had a couple stops along the way, though. The first one was Six Flags Over Georgia. Absolutely loved Six Flags Over Georgia. You could tell that St. Louis at the time and Georgia were still a couple of the original Six Flags parks. St. Louis, unfortunately, hasn't kept up, but Georgia's still really nice. Some great coasters. Actually had some of our favorite coasters at Six Flags Over Georgia. Went down a little bit further and stopped for a day and a half right at the border in Valdosta. Spent the evening at Wild Adventures, and then we caught it again the next morning. Wild Adventures was interesting. At the time, it was not owned by Hershend. It was independent, and it had rained during the day. We actually went in the morning, rode a few rides in the rain, including the coaster, and yes, we're screaming in pain and laughter as we're riding this thing. Went back to our hotel room to dry off a bit, came back, and there was only a few hundred people in the park in the evening, but they still did their fireworks. We were honestly blown away. That was just so cool that this little park, with nobody there because of the weather, still did their fireworks. That was awesome. And then after that, we finally finished our drive down into Florida, got to our new apartment and moved in. It was just an absolutely amazing once-in-a-lifetime trip. Several of those parks we knew were going to be the only time I would ever get to those. I've not been back to Amarillo. I haven't been back to Albuquerque. I haven't been back to some of those other places. I have been blessed to manage to get back to the Grand Canyon again on a completely different trip. But just a fantastic opportunity And I'm so grateful that we were able to take the opportunity to turn it into not just a 3-day drive from one state to the other, but an opportunity to explore the country, to see some of the sites, and to visit stuff that we never would have had the opportunity to otherwise. Managed to add a whole bunch of coasters to my list, including some of my absolute favorites. The Georgia Scorcher was amazing. A Mindbender there as well. It was the first time riding Mr. Freeze, which is absolutely awesome. And even the Boss was a great coaster at the time, and now not so much. The New Mexico Rattler was fantastic. Thunderhead at Dollywood was absolutely amazing. I think we kind of agreed that was our favorite coaster of the trip because it was just so good. Loved several of the parks that we got to go to. Then things like the Grand Canyon. It was honestly an amazing trip. Something that if you ever get a chance to do something like that, do it. It's worth it. So what kind of amazing trips have you been on? Have you gotten to do something once in a lifetime you never get to do again? I would love to hear. We had some fantastic memories of that. Dave and I, of course, being best friends from college, we harassed and teased each other the whole way. And I'm not the best at finding directions. Hey, make a left. Oops, that was a right. Yes, Dave harassed me mercilessly over stuff like that. Just a really cool trip, though, for the time. I'd love to hear your memories of stuff like that, or if you got questions or want to know about some of the other stuff I've done, post it in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe. Thank you, too, to my patrons as well for the support. Back then, I didn't have patrons. Now, for trips like that, it's my patrons who help make it possible. So I am so grateful for them. If you want to know more about Patreon, be sure to check the link down below as well. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless. Checking out Laura Ingalls Wilder home over in... Checking out the Laura Ingalls... Oh my goodness. After spending... Made a stop at Six Flags St. Louis. Saw the art... Before we got there, though, we made stops in Memphis. Wanted to hit Liberty City. Got ready to take that. While most of our furniture, my wife waited for the phone to ring and... Who is calling now?